share it and let it out and say, hey, I'm talking about things. You might be interested in things. And so I think we've got one more hurdle to jump over, and then I'll be able to confirm. Yep, I think we're good all across the services there. So we will be beginning our study probably in about 4 or so minutes, top of the hour. We'll be looking into the text of 2 Corinthians in chapter 9. As I've already mentioned to our 2 other participants that are jumping into the study today, it's a casual conversation. We're looking at the text of God's Word, trying to make application and build spiritual value in our reading together of the text. We'll be looking at it shortly, but until we get there, and before I dispense with the amazing question of the day, which probably won't be that amazing, it never really is, I will pause for a second and say, how you guys doing? Mark, Chris, you guys doing okay? Good, you just head shakes?
Well, I'm doing fine. I'm sort of a late addition, but glad to be here, brother. I appreciate you letting me in. I wanted to talk to Chris about golfing in Texas. I'm a little jealous of how long he gets to play golf during the year, considering I live here 10 miles south of Lake Michigan, and so golfing is a truncated sport up here.
All right, so here's my question then. The second, Chris, you get to go. You good? Everything all right, Chris?
Yeah, we're good, man. We met last night. We got everybody back in the building last night. It felt unbelievably great, and I recommend it for everyone whenever we possibly can. So that was good. And yes to the golf. I like it here. I moved up north a few hours from where I grew up. It gets a little colder in the winter, so there may be like 8 weeks in there where it's iffy. But I know
sorry
colder.
about
I didn't say colder. I said colder. But it's sandy here, so it can rain it can rain 3 inches. You're golfing the next day, so I do like that. But for me, it gets cold. For you, it'd be a joke.
For me, it gets extraordinarily hot this time of year.
So we're going to stay on point right here and right in the land of the cliches. And my question, and I'll answer it too, is your favorite memory associated with playing golf? And I've got to struggle because I've actually got 3 possibilities. Wow. I actually used to play quite a bit. So which of the 2 wants to go first?
I want to hear you, Philip.
Yeah, I want to hear what you said.
What you got?
Okay, so to be fair, I don't really play much golf anymore. I haven't played in a very long time, actually, since a car accident up in Indiana. My back kind of got tweaked. I'm like, I don't really enjoy it enough to go through the rehab phase while also playing golf. And then eventually I realized I really prefer just walking on the course. I think it was Twain who said that a game of golf is an interruption of a great walk or something like that. But there's 3 great memories. I'll give them real quick. Memory number 1 is a 3-way competition for putting with 2 of my buddies down at Florida College in our golf class as students there. It was a lot of fun. It was kind of lifted into my personal memory bank as number 3. Number 2 would be playing at the 9-hole course out in Nevada with my dad. My dad says, you can't get it on the green. And I said, yeah, I can. He's like, there's people on there. There's no way you can hit them. And I'm like, okay, swing, bonk. My dad's screaming 4 because the ball dropped like about 8 feet from the cup. And challenges always improve my ability. Like if you challenge me to something, I will do better afterwards. The third memory, which is probably the top, is playing with my dad in Scotland on the new course, not the old course, but and hitting the ball at a 45-degree bank out over the ocean and watching it cross over the greens and cross over the fairways into the ginormous rough that clearly was just devouring golf balls. So there you go, 3 golf stories from a non-golfer these days.
That's awesome.
Chris, what you got? I know you got a few.
I've got a couple of this. I mean, I love time with my dad. I like that you said that. My dad and I have gotten a lot of rounds in. He moved up here with me about 5 years ago, and his health's not always terrific, bones and ligaments and stuff, but our time together is good, and we get 3 generations out there. We always like that. I had an ace a few years ago in like a little brethren competition we were having in Dallas. I had some Christian guys with me, and I didn't have a great day, but I remember that 7-iron from 174, watching that sucker roll into the hole. But I think even better than that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, my son calls me. I'm at work, and he was 13, and he never calls me. We just text. We 100% text. We never call. So when he called, I wondered if everything was okay. And I answered the phone and he's like, Dad, what you doing? I said, what do you say? You sound weird. Just tell me what happened. And he had made an ace on a par 3 over here by our house. And it was exuberance for him. And I knew that. And we shared that. And I would say that was it. I was pretty proud of him a couple of days ago. He won this tournament in the East Texas championship deal where he had about 175 in on 18 with water in front and to the left. And just needed a par to seal it and just hit a really nice 8-iron in. So, it's the little things, just tucked it in there for a nice par for the win. So we love all that stuff.
Well, first of all, I'm very jealous of your son's ace, and the fact that you hit a 7-iron 174. And he hits an 8-iron 174. That's ridiculous. I guess one of my memories looking back was my father wasn't around, but my grandfather, myself, and my 2 young sons playing together on a little par 3 course near my hometown in Kentucky. That brings back memories. And my son being on the course when I holed out from 150.
Nice.
Hit the pin and it dropped in, and that's probably the closest I'll ever get to an ace. But an eagle on a 4, I'll take it. Yeah, that an 8-iron from 174. That just seems like otherworldly to me.
Yeah, it was smooth.
Yeah, I just pulled the moderate vintage putter from Scotland, the same trip over there that still lives in the office here, even though it just kind of hangs out. But it is time for us to study. So thank you guys for those stories, especially the connections to family. I think that's a wonderful introduction to our conversation. And so we're going to be looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It is an extension of the 8th chapter, which is heavily focused on a couple of key ideas. One, a challenge to be benevolent, and then a deep dive into what real benevolence looks like. And I think Chris, who was with us last week, you may have made the very simple point that as much as we're not comfortable talking about it, it really is about getting into your pocket. It's getting into your dollars and cents, your possessions, but then it shifts and says, how do you use them? It's not just, do you dig, but when you dig deep, what are the things that matter? So before we read the text, anything else you guys want to say on the introduction side before we jump into chapter 9? Because we're now officially in the study.
I've been thinking about something maybe we could talk about early. I'm not sure where else to put it in, but you said that so well, that when there's a need, we dig deep, we dig in our pockets. And we talked last week about how that's not some special collection because brethren have need. That is literally the verse we use, 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, the verse we always use as the pattern example. It says Sunday is for that. I had a great conversation with a guy a few years ago, and maybe it's worth just breaking the ice with this. And he had spent about a year in Saudi Arabia, and they kind of formed a little church over there. And he said, Chris, we did not give on Sunday for the whole year. And I pretty much looked at him like, I'll tell him, I'll send him a letter and let him know what heaven's like, right? Because he's really lost it, right? And he said, Chris, why don't you restudy this? He said, the purpose for the giving was to fulfill the need. It's not that God wants us giving on Sunday just because you have to prove you're a Christian by giving on Sundays. I mean, we sacrifice to the Lord all the time. We should be giving in many ways. His argument was that the contribution on Sunday is a requirement to fulfill the purpose of the things you and I, Mark, Philip, all know. But where there was no purpose, if there was no one to help, if there was no opportunity, then the giving would not be necessary. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but here's why I think it's important, because you might say, well, it'll never be like that. But what I think is interesting is our giving on Sunday needs to be purpose-filled giving. We need to be knowing that our eldership or the men of our congregation have targeted people in need, preachers in the work, future plans for the kingdom spread in our community. And I think elders miss this. They say, hey, give on Sunday because the Bible says give on Sunday. We'll accumulate some money in a fund, and one day we'll find a reason to use it. I don't even know that we're required to give on Sunday under conditions like that. The giving was purpose-driven, and these 2 chapters really excavate the beauty of that purpose. That was why did they give beyond their ability? Because God said give on Sunday or you're not a Christian? No, because there's work to do. So I think it's all very work-oriented. I don't know how you guys feel about that. And I'm not, that guy, I was kidding about, condemning that guy, but it did open my eyes to, maybe purpose is actually the bigger point here than even like the law of Sunday. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So I've got a bunch, but I'm gonna let Mark go because I talked already too much as it is.
You're the host, man. You get to talk as much as you want to.
That's the point, though. I'm try to spread the opportunity around.
Even though his name might cause me some trouble, the Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren was something that really opened my eyes more as I studied through finding purpose rather than just checking off a thing like Lord's Supper check, singing check, prayer check, giving check. And I think sometimes in our condensing of things to, you can count on your fingers, missing the purpose really takes all the steam and all of the joy and all of the gravitas of what we actually do together as brethren. And with that purpose of needy saints, helping saints, and all the other purposes of evangelism and things, it adds more to it. And there is a more of a mindfulness with that approach rather than just, it passed the plate and I'm gonna look bad if I don't put anything in it.
Yeah, and I would probably add this little tidbit from a leadership perspective. If we're going to connect the dots from Rick Warren, who I've also read the book, and there's some profit there. I disagree with the end point of some of his evangelistic ideas, of growing the group ideas. In essence, one of his things was we survey the audience, we find that what they want, we give them what they want. I appreciate the survey the audience side. There's great value there of knowing your people, knowing where you're trying to reach. His response was, well, what they want is potty training and great coffee. So you know what he did? He hired a psychologist, got a barista, and gave them what they want. Of course, the group is going to get bigger. And I actually have a high school friend who was on staff with him with the Willow Church for a long time. But even with that, I can look back and say, but what really strikes me is this. The goals that were set by leadership were given intentional destination points. Like, this is our goal. We're going to do this together. And it reminds me of a quote attributed to Napoleon, that leaders are dealers in hope. They're literally hope dealers. That's my subtitle for my Nehemiah sermon on Sunday that we'll be looking at Nehemiah 7. And think about it to tie together Chris's early comments. In the context where you do not feel like there's purpose to your giving, it's not merely that there is no need. I would suggest that the challenge is that leadership hasn't defined the purpose for the group. God tells us that these are all possibilities in our work, whether we're going to talk about helping other Christians, helping the work of the gospel be spread, helping Christians who live within our community, being benevolent in any of those realms, or encouraging in any of those realms. So the issue isn't checklist, which is a problem. The issue is vision casting, which in this case may have been the problem. The vision net hadn't been thrown far enough where people could say, we can do this. This is something we can be a part of. And when we contribute, boom, now I can see that I'm throwing this giant net out into the sea and we're going to capture some fish.
One of the things that unfortunately I did not listen about last week, in prepping for today, one of the commentators that I said that he said that this type of giving was odd, if not almost absent in antiquity, because the reason that you gave, only rich people gave, and only rich people gave so that they could get some sort of patronage back in return. And so this kind of idea of giving to Corinthian in the Corinthian church and with these Corinthian people was really a foreign idea and notion. Did you talk about that last week?
We didn't talk about it too much. We did talk about the conflict of the wealthy and the poor in Corinth as a structural issue, because it had already been kind of the big thing that the wealthy were kind of isolated. Now, I do want to bring this up. We got a couple of comments. I'll drop those in a second. But follow on with that. I think there is a cultural cue. I know N.T. Wright deals with it a little bit. I also know that in De Silva's works, he deals with these cultural conflicts of the expected normality and the practical reality in Corinth for the believers there. Do you want to add more, Chris? Go ahead.
one thing that I think has been great. I've been here at Lindale 5 years, and for about 3 or 4 of those years, I never preached a single sermon on giving because we were meeting the needs. The eldership had laid out what we were trying to do. We had that figured out to a number each week. Everything was going fine. So I came to the elders one time a couple of years ago, and I said, I know 4 gentlemen who are requesting financial support. And they said what, any eldership would say. They'd say, well, if our contribution was here instead of here, then we would be able to do it. And I said, would it be okay if I just preached a sermon? I haven't preached one here in 3 years. If I just preached a sermon on Sunday night and I showed pictures of these men and their families and the churches they were working with and the relationship that we had with them, and just laid it out before the Christians and said, if you want to support these guys, Sunday is your chance to do that. And we rolled it out that way. We showed the picture. And I mean, I don't have to tell you the end of that story. You know what happened on Sunday and what's happened consistently since then. There were people who could have given more. I mentioned this last week from my mother, who could have given more over the years, but didn't because there was no purpose. But as soon as you saw those faces, and my good friend, one of my best friends in the world, David Osteen, or some of these other guys, and their family and their work, it was like, yes, beyond our liberality, we're going to give beyond even what we'd ever budgeted because we want to help that guy. And these 2 chapters, they're the heart of that message. And I think that from a leadership down, this is more of what we should be discussing.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and read the text a little bit. We're already 12 minutes in. We've summarized some things. We've got only 15 verses on the table as a core point. Chris, do you want to read verses 1 through 5 for us?
Sure. Reading from the New American Standard, updated. For it is superfluous for me to write to you about this ministry to the saints. For I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the Macedonians, namely that Achaia has been prepared since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. But I have sent the brethren, in order that our boasting about you may not be made empty in this case, so that, as I was saying, you may be prepared. Otherwise, if any Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to speak of you, will be put to shame by this confidence. So, verse 5, I thought it necessary to urge the brethren that they would go on ahead to you and arrange beforehand your previously promised bountiful gift, so that the same would be ready as a bountiful gift and not affected by covetousness.
So I think there's like a way for us to frame this. And by the way, Chris Kramer and Ed Rangel both had a couple of comments. Chris was talking about how did the individuals give back to God? What do you blessed them with it in that situation? I think referring specifically to the illustration you gave, Chris, we can adjust that in a second. And I do think also the covenantal relationship of Israel and Jehovah should be reflected in our perspective of our now relationship in the covenant of Christ. Like it's more than just we show up on time, we participate physically. God wanted Israel wholly devoted to him under the law. Jesus wants us wholly devoted to the kingdom in Christ. And that includes, yes, all the physical stuff, even deep in our pockets. But that only really reaches that goal when our heart comes into play. But verses 1 through 5, what do we got? And Chris, if you want to comment to Chris Kramer's question, you can. If you didn't hear it, I'll text it over to you as well.
Okay.
But let me just do this. And I think this is important. In these verses 1 through 5, Paul goes back in this give and take relationship with the text. And if you remember in chapter 8, at times he had challenged them. He had thrown down the gauntlet. And he says, look, this is what everyone else is doing. These are what your Macedonian brethren are doing. This is why aren't you doing this? But now he switches the tables back around. And he says, now look, this is superfluous, as it says in the ESV text. Or you could think about it, as it's no surprise. Like it's no surprise that, in his essence, bragging on them. He's talking about how good they are. And so as much as he had pushed, now he's pulling. He's gone around to the other end of the table and said, I'm pulling because I know your heart. I know who you are. I know you'll rise to this challenge. And I love how he does that in these 2 chapters to these brethren. He pushes when necessary. He pulls them back up when also of value. What do you guys see here yourselves?
I'm sorry.
No, you're supposed to interrupt. That was one of the rules.
Okay. One of the things that he's like, look, I've already bragged on you guys. And the reason that the Macedonians have done so well in their giving that he's already mentioned is because I was bragging on you. And now if Macedonians come with me and you're not ready, we all gonna look like fools. I mean, and so this idea is, come on, guys, and I love the motivation. He's not trying to guilt them into it. In a lot of telethons, I don't know if you all grew up watching the Jerry Lewis telethon on Labor Day, but he tried to guilt people into giving, and they would, and sometimes, unfortunately, we get letters from preachers, especially overseas, trying to guilt us. You rich Americans, you've got so much, and the idea is, I know you can do this. And maybe there's a little guilt thrown in there, but he says, I know you can do this. And you should have already been prepared for this, right?
Yeah, I think particularly in verses 6 and 7, Paul even deals with that. And when we get there in a second, after we kind of walk through verses 3, 4, and 5, I really like and appreciate the plain reading of the Message translation in that text, because it's very simplified. And as much as I like to use big words and complicated ideas when figuring things out, the Message simplifies it for me in a second. Now, Mark's all digging around going, what's the Message have to say about this?
What did Eugene say? Let me say a quick thing to Chris. I typed up a response as well in the message. That his question is, if there was no design, I think I understand this question. If there were no Christian in Jerusalem to help, how would you fulfill your individual responsibility to give if you didn't do it? And my counter question is, do you have an individual responsibility to give on Sunday at all if there is no collective church purpose that it's going to? Was there a collection on the first day of the week before there was a famine in Judea? Or did it begin, not like if you're in the church, you have to give on Sundays, otherwise you're not a Christian. It's, we now have a reason. Now I would argue that if you do enough digging in our digital society, there is always a good reason to give, and churches can always participate in good work of evangelism and supporting preaching, etc. But the question is, if you strip the purpose for the giving and the direction away, does the giving still stand as a requirement for Christians? And I just think it's worth thinking about. I'm not arguing an answer. I'm just saying that it's like the donut principle we've talked about a lot. You take the heart of it out, what do you really have? The other thing I would say about these 5 verses is, there's a couple of guys I love who really preach the idea of do things well. If you're going to do something, do it well. Don't half do it. Don't start it. One of them is Max Dawson. He basically wrote a book on do things well, like cut the grass at the church building. If you're going to do a building, do it well. And Mark Roberts, who didn't write a book on do it well, but he dissects every possible angle of what could go wrong, and he compensates for it double time. Like, he believes that if you're going to do something in the name of God, both of them do, it needs to be done with excellence. I really like that here. It's like Paul saying, if we're going to have this collection, let's do this right. Let's make sure we do our best. Let's make sure we're coordinated. Let's make sure it all works. In fact, I know you're doing fine, but I'm going to go ahead and send somebody ahead anyway, just to make sure it's all going well, because what we don't want is to have a great thing going, and because we just put it on autopilot, the Macedonians are going to show up, and I've got some Thessalonians that are coming, some Philippians, and they're going to be like, this is what this was all about. I mean, the Corinthians didn't even know we were coming. So I love the idea of, this is important. Let's coordinate. Let's go above and beyond. Let's do it well.
Yeah, my friend Flay Flatt, who was one of the shepherds at Jerry Woodson Road for a very long time until he passed away, always encouraged me to do one thing. He demonstrated himself. He says, if it matters to you, someone tells you they'll call you back at a certain time tomorrow, you just call them back, because it matters to you. You don't do it because you're checking on them. Maybe that's a thing. You don't do it because you don't believe they'll call you back. It's not that, because it matters. In the spiritual realm, I think that's an important principle. And I'm also a fan of Max and Mark in that area and other areas too, about making sure we do things to the standard that honors God. That's higher than the world standard. It's not just, we got it done. It's, we're offering our whole selves, and every ounce of us are there. And so I want to drop in this thing, and this is a good connection. in verses 6 and 7, and in the Message or Eugene's translation, if we want to use the sidebar comment, 2 Corinthians 9 reads this way: remember, a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. A lavish planter gets a lavish crop. I want each of you to take plenty of time to think it over and make up your own mind what you will give. Now, here's the thing that I think is really important. That will protect you against sob stories and arm twisting. God loves it when the giver delights in the giving. How often is it that, like someone pointed out, and I know Mark pointed this out, you get this letter that's like 10 paragraphs of how awful it is. And you know at the end of it, they're going to ask. Yeah. They're going to ask. And you might have already calculated in your head, look, I know where this is going. Let's get there. How much better it would be that when the letter comes, there's no need for the sob story. You have a need, boom, done. How can we help you do more? How can we help you be more or serve more?
Yep. Awesome.
I love that. Things that
Eugene, some credit, man. That guy, as a commentator, there's some solid stuff in that thing. I'll comment on 6 and 7 just a little bit. I know Mark's got a lot of great things to say, but I've been reading this book, The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. I may have mentioned it last week. And what I like in the open is he just talks about principles. Look, there are just principles in life that are real and they exist. You don't have to believe them or not. You don't have to accept them or not. But the sooner you accept those principles, the better off you're going to be, because you can begin to take advantage of them. Verses 6 and 7 is principle filled. If you give little, you will get little. That's true in almost, love, money, you name it. If you can't give in faith, then you can't receive. If you give bountifully, and this is money talk here, then God's going to be like, hey, that's somebody I might could give more resources to. Look at what he does with his resources. He's proven to himself what he does with them. And I'm a big check in the mail guy. I know this, now I'm getting really shady, but you guys used some crazy liberal guy example book earlier, so I feel safe in this setting. But Warren and them. But I'm a big check in the mail guy. Like, you give to people, you do for people. I've gotten random checks in the mail. I'm just telling you, God, we can talk money a little bit here because this text is about it. God's like, that guy's using resources well. I will give that guy more resources. Folks, this is a life principle. You can say that's hogwash. I don't believe in that. And you can cite some exception to the rule and all this kinds of stuff, because principles do have potential exceptions. But this is the way life works. You give, you receive. You give little, you receive little. And there's tons of parables that would echo that.
Mark, you got to jump in here before I drop a bomb of random possibilities.
Well, first of all, I need to know about this Eugene translation, because you just completely lost me. So we can maybe talk about that later. But,
around the horn, we'll hit it up then.
The gospel just jumps out of this. God has freely given. And, he went to great lengths back in the first letter, and he's shown all of this grace, and you didn't deserve it. And this is just, as Chris pointed out, this should be just natural for Christians, both individually and then congregationally, and following that pattern. But this idea of, come on, guys, don't you know? Wow. Do you deliver in Chicagoland?
Sorry.
Okay. It's a coffee shop, right? So, but it just surprises me when Christians saved by grace get stingy. It just surprises me. But also dealing with an immature church, coming out of fleshliness and patronage, and the idea of finding all sorts of reasons not to listen to Paul, not to give, this idea of, come on, guys, we understand this. You've been given freely.
Yeah, and I think there's a very simplified illustration. Chris talks about checking the mail. And this is where I think an important principle can get practical. As a young college kid in school at Florida College, and most of my family are not interwoven into the body of Christ. At this point, my parents had not been baptized, had not been converted, feeling kind of alone, but there was a small church in Mississippi that I met one time, and they got my address, And every now and then I'd get little packages in the mail from these people I had never met because they cared about me and didn't really, they're not like me, they don't look like me, they don't have my experiences or any of those things. And it would show up because after chapel service at Florida College, everyone goes over to the mail wall and checks their mail. And every now and then that would be the source of encouragement. We're not talking about a tremendous amount of money. The things were almost always very inexpensive, but it was a note, it was a card, it was a letter. A very simple illustration. You want to have a powerful impact on someone, apply that principle. Drop them a Chick-fil-A gift card for $10, which is not in our current economic condition much money. That's 2 meals for a college kid if they're wise. And most college kids are pretty money and cash wise when it comes to meals. You can give them a Taco Bell card and that's like 4 meals for the college kid. But you think about how much impact in a positive way, particularly now. I've just used a really simple illustration. What if it's not a college kid who isn't as needy as a neighbor or someone you've just met and you recognize that their condition is not where God could have them be spiritually or otherwise? I do think there's a principle that underlies this narrow realm of application in the congregational work that God is pulling from, that we need to pay attention to. Ed brought it up from Ecclesiastes 11, verse 1, that generosity is a biblical truth without respect to covenant, and it is. But I think that's undergirding all of this. Anything else on verses 1 through 7? Chris, I know you got something right there.
I would just add, that's so great. And I would add that the principle of the heart is really key here as well. Another principle is if the heart's not in it, it doesn't really matter what you do. It may benefit people, but it's not going to reward you before God. A widow gave 2 mites, and Jesus made sure that everybody for the rest of the history of the world knew about it. A man and his wife gave a chunk of money and were struck dead. Much more money. What's the difference? She gave out of the right heart. She gave for the right reason. She gave all that she had. The other guys, they wanted recognition. They wanted to, as we always talk about, the box checking. And when it came down to it, they weren't able to give everything they committed. They lied, of course, and talking about in Acts 5 there and in Ananias and Sapphira. But in the end, they still gave a lot. Don't leave this going, okay, I got it on Sundays. And by the way, most of this is attached to Sundays, although all of Philip's comments are correct underlying it. Don't be like, ooh, I'm going to double, triple my giving on Sunday. Therefore, I'm going to. No, you got to stop. You have to have a heart for the work, a heart for the mission, and a heart of trust. At least give going, this is me. I have a great story about my brother. I could tell about my 2 brothers. And one of them, I'm supposed to be the preacher giving good advice, but one of them, just everything he tried failed. And the other brother's like, are you giving to God on Sunday just to give to God? Just to start that? He's like, no, I can't do that. I'm barely making ends meet. He said, you give to God. You trust in God's hand, and it changed everything. But that's got to start in a heart of faith, not I think I don't understand the math on this. Checks will start coming in the mail. And you don't think God can read all that? Come on. God's already read it before you even started.
Mark?
An interesting point there in verse 7. One of the commentators, I said, it came out of the Septuagint and not out of the Hebrew text there about how God loves a cheerful giver. But the idea, of course, God loves everybody. And to Chris's point, he's going to use a miser's money when they, drop a quarter in the collection plate when they're millionaires. But the idea of God appreciates a cheerful giver. He loves a cheerful giver. Why? Because he is a cheerful giver. He freely gave. And this idea of without compulsion, not reluctantly, this idea of, I could use this to play golf or, get a peppermint mocha or something from Starbucks, or, well, that's the whole point of getting into the pockets that you guys apparently talked about last week. If we're worried about all the other ways that we could use it, that bespeaks the heart.
Yeah, and I think also, particularly now as we pay attention to verses 8 and 9, and I'm going to shift over to the ESV for this, away from Eugene Peterson's personal translation / commentary.
The message, right?
That's the message.
Yeah.
And it reads this way: and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed freely, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. And so I'm going to pull out if I had a whiteboard and good penmanship, I would totally be rocking it right now, but I don't possess either of those two things. Heavy emphasis on the bad penmanship side. But think it through. Culturally in Corinth, you have the triune nature of grace, the three graces, and the way in which grace given, there's an expectation for that grace to be shared, and there's an anticipation of that grace returning to the initial grace giver. Now pay attention here. God is encouraging the same triple threat taking place, where all grace will abound to you at all times in every good work. And so you're going to have that same return. And then the citation that Paul uses, distributed freely, given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. I think Paul has structured by inspiration and perspiration a classic illustration that catches onto a picture that the Corinthians probably already would know deeply. They already know how this works, because culturally this is how it was supposed to work. But Paul is saying, if you add the lever that is God, it's going to destroy all you thought possible, and it's going to actually move into the realm of a change in your spiritual condition, not just physical. Need a whiteboard, maybe like John Madden level illustration type stuff going on there. But
Mark, you say something, man. I feel woefully insufficient to comment following that beautiful display of grace understanding. That was really well done, man. Good job.
I thought that was beautiful. And to your point, all of this hinges on God's faithfulness. His faithfulness, his righteousness is not going to, you don't have to worry about what's going on later. A hint back, Chris, to Matthew 6. It's his righteousness that is going to endure forever. He's going to take care of you, which is the basis of all of this.
I think we struggle sometimes because it's the same thing we do with Romans. That's a book. We sometimes look at Romans and we narrow it down and we say, well, how can I use Romans in response to a Calvinistic approach to redemption, John Calvin's system of redemption? And we forget that Romans wasn't written in response to that. Calvin wasn't on the scene when Romans is written. And so it's teaching bigger things. It can respond to Calvin, but it's not written to respond to Calvin. And so we get to 2 Corinthians 9, and either we're saying, well, it's actually talking about the narrowness of work in the congregational context, and we've got to be doing it that way. Yes, that's true. But it's not written that way. It's not written to define that aspect, because Paul does something that's also uncomfortable, because we reject the health and the wealth doctrines of the Joel Osteens, etc. We say, well, how can this text here then be used? How about we use it just as it is?
Right.
Because verse 10, and Mark, if you want to read for us 10 through 15, that will kind of summarize the last chunk.
Sure.
It's still in the Bible, even if you're uncomfortable with it.
I'll read from the ESV, considering the crowd that I'm with today. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others, while they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift.
So again, you look at verse 10. Seed for the sower, bread for the food, will also provide and multiply your seed and increase the harvest of your, and contextual, righteousness. And so there's an impact that when you give, there's going to be a return. And I think the deviation is, at least when I look at it, is what we tend to deviate and think, well, if I give, I'll get physically. And that's not at all what the text has said. it's implied underneath that God will provide you to be able to do more. But that's not the return you're looking for. You're not looking for your bank account to go up and the Yeezys to show up, and I can drive this great car. You're looking for your harvest of righteousness to grow. And if you're going to textually tie it together, basically you're saying, you gave me this talent, God. When you give me more, I will also use it like I used this first one.
I would say a couple of things connected to what Philip said last time before the read, and that is, this is a principle, as we've said, which means the concept here lies at the base of everything. Built upon that base is congregational giving for the church work of the saints. So I think Philip's right. You can apply what you're seeing here more broadly in terms of what you do in private as well, because the principle is at play there. People say, can I give to get? I say yes. You can give to get if there's a lot of stuff in between. You give because people have need and you love them and you want to assist with that need. You give because you are thankful to God and it is an expression of your gratitude. And these are all three in the text. You give because it encourages God's people to help them understand who we are and how we operate. If you give to help people in need, to thank God for his graciousness and to encourage brethren, yeah, you're probably going to get more. Why would God not give you more? And it doesn't have to be money. It could be time, opportunity, a plethora of things. Who would God give it to if not you? But you can't shortcut it. You can't start from the end and work your way back. You got to start in the middle. You have to have your love in place and your purpose in place. And yeah, there's no limit to what God can do. Now you may be thinking, but weren't there first century Christians who gave all they had and got nothing in return? Look, here's the big payoff here. If God chooses not to do this, they've been dead a long time, folks. And wherever they are, if you're a Hadean guy or a straight to heaven guy, and I don't really care which guy you are, they are in glory. They are in the fulfillment of what righteousness was always about. And they're not looking back on the $2 they gave going, ooh, I really should have kept that. There's just no losing. You can't lose. If you give of the talents you have, time, experience, opportunity, money, whatever, for those three reasons: help, appreciate God, thank God, and encourage.
Yeah. And I noticed something, Mark Scott may have a comment here. You slipped in, I think, one of the least considered reasons on the purpose planned side. Very often when we begin to argue about this subject, about like congregational work, we'll talk about, well, the needs have to be limited to the idea of evangelism / edification and then benevolence. And that's where our money goes. But in the middle is actually the one that I tend to emphasize. You give it all of this to honor God. Practically, we'll spend it in the ways that God said, do this thing, but you're giving it to God. And the more you think about it that way, it turns it into a sacrifice, an offering. Here it is, God, this is for you. And because I love you and whom you are, let's do good, whatever it is you want, whatever the good is you need us to do. That's part of the purposing side. That's part of the vision casting side. That's part of the picture side. Mark?
Back to the purpose of giving, Satan has a fleshly way of twisting things. The patronage back, you gave to get. You gave to get influence. You gave so that somebody at some point would do you a favor in return. Well, here is the full righteous way that we give. We give because we are generous, because we have been gifted in every way. And we're giving not only just to supply things, but there is a much larger picture than food on a plate or support from month to month. It is to honor God. And that is going to flow into overflowing thanksgivings, both for you and to God, which is the purpose of a child of God, to honor God. And the approval of this is, you may not get a chevron on your sleeve. You may not get a medal on your jacket. And honestly, you probably shouldn't want people to know how much you're giving, but God's going to know. Yeah. And he's going to be like a father is pleased by his son. Chris, back to your point, when your son got that ace or he smoothed that 8-iron, there's more joy in seeing your children grow like this and to grow into this than anything else. And all of this, get to verse 15, all of this has been set up by God for you, he says. And who wouldn't be encouraged to do something like this? I mean, it kind of gets me pumped up this morning about this idea about look how great we've got it when you look at it the right way.
That's awesome. Philip, I would say, just because Chris is going to comment in a minute, the guy that asked me about the giving, he's going to say, well, maybe if you don't even have the purpose lined out of who you're helping, what if you're doing it for the other two reasons? Shouldn't we give on Sunday mornings, at least in thanksgiving to God and to encourage brethren, even if we don't have a purpose? To which I would say, and I love where we're going with this, that, individually, sure, collectively, maybe that is the reason. But I think it just means that elderships and men in churches need to find work to do and define that work, like get us involved, because the two peripheral benefits, I don't think I need to give on Sunday morning to show God that I'm appreciative for him and to encourage brethren. I think I should be doing that on Tuesdays, Saturday afternoons, and all the time. But when a church gets like, and I'm with you, Mark, like I'm charged up today, like really gets into this, like this, you take this act of worship we do on Sunday, and all of a sudden it's just this great buy-in and appreciation. And I think God rewards churches who do things this way in the same way the principle works for the individual.
Yeah, and Ed Rangel asked a question, and I think it kind of clarifies the struggle sometimes. He says, would we agree that as long as the Great Commission exists, there is a legitimate need to give of our means and to give with a willing and cheerful heart? And I would say absolutely on a technical level. But it's one of those cases where, for me, that arrives at the conclusion with a question that I would at a different question point, because that practical reality he's describing, there's a legitimate need out there, needs to be redefined, and the leadership, your heart, the church, the preacher, you need to look farther, because the minute you look farther, it won't be like a technical, well, we know there's out there somewhere. You'll have defined it as Steve or David or Bob or Rolando or Vladimir. They'll have a person behind it. And the need is now they need it. He needs it. Or the brethren in Macedonia or Judea or Christians in Beirut, they need it. And they need us to be willing to serve them. That's a whole different level of interaction that God needs us to rise to. And leaders who are dealers in hope will then put that on the table and say, we hope we can do this. Let's do it together. And you know what? They'll come back and say, yes, we can do it together. And you can do it, and you can do it, and we can do it. I think that's probably a summarization, to me at least, of what's in the context of verses 1 through 15, is to deal that hope.
Yeah.
Last thoughts around the horn. Mark, what you got? You're up.
I was just going to say, I think this shows a growth in the church and what Paul expected out of the church from the first letter. They couldn't even do communion right because they were so individualistic in the way that they were doing. Some people are hungry and some people are drunk. Well, now here is the communal aspect. And it's not only a community in the church, but it's also a community in the body. And you've got Jews in Judea who are struggling, who don't have enough food to eat, that you can help them. And what are they going to do? They're going to be thankful for you. And by the way, they're the ones that sent you the gospel anyway. And so you have this unity, you have this community, you have this fellowship in this sharing together that folks will appreciate more. And it's just beyond the, well, we can't do that with the money. Certainly there are bounds that we can see, but you look at how far you can go and what the blessings can come. And you hear back from folks that you have supported and the benevolence that folks who are just in awe of. And it's just this wonderful relationship that Paul is taking them on step by step into a growth process in the Lord to where he's glorified and they're better for it.
That's great. Philip, I know you want to wrap up. I know it's 45 minutes in, but we have to talk a little bit about verse 13. It would be, I think, a little bit of an injustice. We really do have to discuss it. I told Philip I wanted to share a short story. A couple of years ago, one of the young men at our church was dating a girl whose parents went to what I guess we would call a large institutional church, I think is fair language for this audience. And they take a very aggressive stance against people like, I think, Mark and Philip and me. And I had never heard that before. They were like, the fact that you don't use your funds to help the needy in the community means that you're probably going to be lost for that. Like they took that. I'd never really heard that before. And so this guy reached out to me and he was super concerned about his daughter dating this guy who went to church here. And he reached out and he said, look, my preacher just preached 3 sermons on general benevolence and the authority for general benevolence. And for those who aren't aware, it means using the contribution, even though we have 8 examples of it going to saints, no examples of it going to non-saints. He said, I got these 3 sermons. So I was really excited. I said, look, man, I want to believe you. Like you've already got a fan. Like you show me the pattern and I'm in. He said, well, it's a lock, you know. So he sends it to me. And the first sermon and a half, I'll just sum up in 3 seconds. It was just an attack. I mean, there was no evidence. I was really surprised. I've never really seen, quote, liberals like attack conservatives in that way. I don't know. Maybe that's what we do with no Bible class people. I don't know. But anyway, another time. But anyway, he finally got down to it and he said, I'm going to show you the passage that seals the deal. And I got to be honest, his James 1 argument wasn't very good. His Galatians 6 argument wasn't very good. I mean, he really didn't even try. But he had it all locked up when he went to 2 Corinthians 10, verse 13. He said, this is the silver bullet where it says, and you guys know this already, for the liberality of your contribution to them and to all. He hung the entire 3 sermon argument on the word ALL, that even though we have every example is for saints, the collection was for saints, the ministry is for saints, it's overwhelming in the text, in Romans 15 and Acts 2 and Acts 4. That word ALL in 2 Corinthians 9:13 is and that was it, guys. Like that was his entire argument. Now, obviously, from the perspective of when we preach this, we talk about how the them was the saints in Jerusalem and the all is saints anywhere. That gets attacked. People disagree. But I was reading this book. I just finished it yesterday or 2 days ago, The Simple Pattern, put together by Jim Deason, a collection of articles. And I think it was in Paul Earnhardt's article on this. He said something I hadn't noticed before. And you made me think of it, Mark, when you said my favorite word, fellowship. You could have said koinonia. You went with fellowship. They're both good. But do you guys know that in verse 13, when it says the liberality of your contribution, which ESV also said contribution, I don't know what Eugene would say, but he said contribution, that's fellowship. He said your fellowship to them and to all. The word koinonia is used very beautifully and selectively in the New Testament. It's a sharing in something. There's a fellowship in 1 John. There's a fellowship in the faith. There's a fellowship in giving. 2 Corinthians is at chapter 6. You guys studied this. Said we don't have fellowship with lost people. We don't have that fellowship with those who don't share in the gospel. So this idea of using koinonia, he said, we're in a fellowship with saints in Jerusalem and saints everywhere. If all means everyone, it means heathen sinners. It means completely lost atheists. Are we in fellowship with them in any way as a body of Christ? The answer is no. So I thought he made a nice secondary argument in addition to all the examples that the idea that we have fellowship with saints and just fellowship with whoever is ludicrous. It's taking one word and just building a massive house out of straw and glass with it. And I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, it's totally right on point. I think, and this is like, I've got some wonderful people in my life who associate with the mainstream churches of Christ as they sometimes self-identify. And we talk about this. It's a regular conversation point. I think it's super important that in the New Testament texts, what I see is that the work of the church is focused heavily on growing the kingdom internally and externally. And the work of the Christian is on being what God wants us to be in the kingdom. And I think that's kind of how I answer this question. He's like, our focus is on this. This is what our purpose is. This is who we are and what we do. We don't complain about what everyone else is doing at a leadership level. We don't do that as a preaching level. I no longer do that. I focus on this is who we are and who we're going to be. And I think Paul is doing that here. And I think it's right to kind of lock into this. This really is that in the James text, Galatians text are the 3 passages that tend to get brought up. And we can respond to a number of ways. I think one of them is like you've done what Paul does in his article. It's kind of break down the language there. The Galatians one's super obvious to me. The James one requires a little bit more conversation with folks to kind of break down on the linguistic level what's going on. But in the end, I always point out, says, look is what we're doing. Is what we are doing as a congregation exciting to you? Are you enthused by our spiritual interaction and our healthy interaction with the text and with God? If you want to be part of it, come be part of it. If you don't fit in here, okay.
Yeah.
I understand. And it's okay. Like, I don't fight about it in the ways that I used to really get the hackles up.
Yeah.
I've had folks in my family get mad because well, you guys, and it's always the Ross Perot, you people, it's all, he says, you guys you don't care about the poor. And I'm like, how do you know we don't?
Yeah.
And the idea, this is a very specific text for a specific purpose. He's not talking about generalities. What are Christians known for? Well, if you look in Acts and you look at history, Christians have gone to great lengths individually to take care of everybody wherever they can. And this idea of you people don't give is kind of like saying you people don't adopt, and which again is ludicrous. But this idea of general versus specific benevolence and all those sorts of ideas, and you guys covered it very well. And I'm like, so are we supposed to keep a bulletin board in the back showing all the people that we're doing that, that we're giving to the poor, or are we going to just let the text speak for itself in the bounds of the purpose and the context that it's talking about?
Yeah, I'll straight up tell you, I'm not a fan of a nickels and noses board. That's a Warren King-ism from behind the pine curtain. But let's sum things up. I think we've really dug into the text. I really appreciate the additional commentary on verse 13. That's an excellent point, and I already knew that Chris was going to bring that in. As we always do, I want to encourage everyone to know a couple things. To know that Mark, Chris, and I will be happy to talk to you about God, about the scriptures, and about your spiritual condition, both positively and if there's things you need to work out. If you just want to grow more, we're happy to talk. You got stuff you're working out, join the three of us. There's stuff we're working out too. And we're always working out our faith and our understanding of whom God is and whom God needs us to be. Chris, you're always welcome to come back. Mark, you're always welcome to come back. If you get enough of you great guys with your great comments, then I can sit here and just click buttons and not talk as much. And I'm totally down with that too. Anything going on, Chris? You plugged some stuff last week. You plugged your work with Excel still more and your coloring activities. I joke about those, but I also know they're good and you do good work with them. Anything else you want to say? Mark, you get one more around the horn and I'll close us out for real in a second.
Some of the same stuff. The Excel Still More episodes release on Monday, but I actually released finally one bonus episode. I want to do that on Thursdays occasionally. So released one today on the follow-up question on becoming a master conversationalist. Takes just a few skills that you're intentional about. And one of them is the power of the follow-up question. So if you check that out, Excel Still More, wherever you can get a podcast. And yeah, we're about to start color Bible marking. There's a Facebook page for that. I've done 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John all the way through, but we're about to start doing some Psalms. And then, guys, I just have to say it again. For those of you whose churches are not yet assembling, just hang in there. We started assembling on Sunday nights this last week and Wednesday nights. And yeah, we're taking a bit of a risk and we're spacing out the seats, but we're still all, look, take precautions, do what you got to do, but just hang in there. I'm telling you, it's coming. You'll be back together soon, and it'll be the best thing that ever happened to you. Just keep the hope alive on this. We're working through it, and it's all going to be okay.
Mark?
Well, I can certainly appreciate. We've been meeting for over a month now, and I remember, I thought, the 2 months that we didn't do very well was bad. I feel for brethren who are still suffering through spikes and issues like that. We're just meeting on Sundays and I'm posting a video about every week on the minor prophets, trying to condense each minor prophet into a 20 or 25 or 30-minute lesson, which is increasingly more difficult the older that I get, trying to condense things. But however you can look at it with the church here in Valparaiso. Chris, it's a pleasure to meet you, even though it's digitally and continentally far apart. And Philip, again, I appreciate you letting me join in today. I really appreciate this work. Thanks, guys.
Thanks to both of you. I'm going to close with a reframing of a quote from Jurassic Park, Ian Malcolm's little take in the text, but I want to try to apply it to us as believers. So Ian Malcolm, there in the movie, he says something along these lines, and I'm shifting it. He says, and this is my version of it, so it's been modified. If there's one thing that the history of believers has taught us, is that faith will not be contained. Faith breaks free. It expands new territories and crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously so. There it is. Faith will find a way. I want to encourage everyone that no matter what your congregation determines is best for its assemblies, that let faith find a way. I want to encourage each of us, both as believers together who are kind of teaching in this way, to allow faith to find its way too. May God bless you in everything that you do.